Hey friends, welcome to another episode of Seeking Our Spirit. Got a good one for you today. A good buddy of mine, Chris Douglas, came to speak, tell his story, talk about spirit in his life. We had a lot of fun, so it was a great joy to have him. I hope you enjoy. As always, if you want to be on the show or share your story or share just a simple story about spirit, whatever that means to you, reach out to me at seekingourspirit@gmail.com. Would love to talk to you. Y'all enjoy. All right, my friend, we're rolling. Salud.
Salute.
Thank you for letting me come to your home and do this with you. I'm going to embarrass you and blow smoke for a minute first, because you're like on my headhunting list, on my top people to get on here. Yeah. Well, because I was reflecting on, well, one, I just think our sort of story is cool in that, we just randomly met sort of like through your sister's wedding.
My sister's wedding, yeah.
And that interaction was funny. And then you started coming to the Theology on Tap group. And now, we've been basically almost every week seeing each other and having meaningful conversations and discussions and developing a friendship for like 13 years.
Yeah, that's right. It's been a really long time.
So it's pretty awesome. And so I was reflecting on that. And just, I thought that for the purposes of this show, of all of sort of my friends and in my group of folks and folks at that group, you sort of can bridge, you get me a little closer to where I'm trying to go, I guess I would say.
Gotcha.
Because it's like, this is some of the stuff I'm sure we'll talk about, but you were churched, like religious, but it was different enough from like the norm. And then also because of life experiences, you've been sort of in various times of your life very outside of that circle.
Right.
So I just was really excited to do this with you, man. Plus I love you and respect you and think you got a lot of cool things to say. So
I appreciate that. Yeah, this I'm looking forward to this. I think it's gonna be fun.
Yeah, so I guess we just dive in. I mean, okay, right, the point of this is to try to just figure out with people when we say this word spirit or spirituality, what does it mean to various people? What does it mean to you? So I don't know if you want to start just in childhood. Did you have any sort of experiences there? Was spirituality or awareness of, a higher power part of your life from a younger age? Was it through church, whatever?
Well, I grew up Episcopal. As you know, my parents were very active in the Episcopal Church in Reno, mm-hmm. where I was born. But sometime around middle school, they stopped attending church for a while, and then I went away to live at high school for years. And where I went to high school, it's almost like Christianity wasn't even a religion where I went to high school, right? It was a very new age, Indian spirituality kind of place. So,
but it was like a boarding school, though?
It was, but, our boarding school, like the closest other structure to our boarding school was this meditation center that had like this gigantic crystal-filled meditation room in it and stuff.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so... there was a lot of just open spirituality back in those days. And even when we were going to the Episcopal Church, and I went to Episcopal camps, to be honest with you, I could not remember a whole lot of focus on I was a kid, but, I just can't remember a whole lot of focus on Jesus, Trinity, salvation in particular. Wasn't like, it was sort of like you're just learning all these things,
sure.
but
seems very typical Episcopalian. So
yeah.
So we're going to do this very gently, right?
You got a lot of knowledge, but it was like, oh, that's what that's for,
Yeah.
But, and then I moved to Knoxville after I got out of high school and was still I didn't really have a whole lot of intention around church either.
Yeah.
And I wasn't really thinking much about church for a long time.
Let me ask you a couple questions before you continue there. So, you go to this boarding school. I mean, usually boarding schools are religious in nature. So this was not. This was not
No.
affiliated with anything.
Oh Lord, no, no,
Interesting.
no. It was a very liberal arts. I mean, Ojai, California is like an artist colony in
Okay.
Southern California.
Okay.
It's there's only like 8,000 people that live there. The whole town is basically.
I just don't think I've ever
New
heard
Age
of
center.
I've never heard of like a boarding school that wasn't like under a church umbrella. So that's
Oh,
interesting.
yeah, there's actually a lot
Huh.
that are. I don't know. I can only think of one actually religiously affiliated school that was
Okay.
in my whole
Okay.
network of schools down there.
So, okay, with that meditation center being there and all that stuff, so were you exposed to spiritual like practices, or did you have any?
No,
Was that part of your life at all there?
not really.
Okay.
I mean, it was, yeah, I mostly just bring it up just to kind of say that, like, that was the closest thing to a
Okay.
church I even remember seeing
Okay.
in most of my high school years.
Yeah,
Other than something that was a historical site,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So it was, but an active, actual thing like that was about the closest it
Okay.
came. Now, that place was actually mostly because. I mean, I was in high school, you used to like sneak over there and stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
it was usually empty when you got there, but it was open to the public all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like going to wander around an empty church.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
I read some brochures.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So okay. So and then you get to Knoxville. You're saying, and then
Yeah, and again, I didn't really have
how old were you then?
18.
Okay. So
18,
you
so-
were done with high school?
Yeah, I was done with high school, and I moved here right after that.
Yeah.
Well, I moved here that summer after
Yeah.
high school.
Now, but so okay, well, because that's a big swath of time there. So, like, am I hearing you say that even just like internally in your own just existence, right? There weren't things in your life, middle school, high school, whatever, that you would deem sort of spiritual.
I didn't. Honestly, I don't. Up until I've gotten older, I don't really draw a very strict line between what's spiritual and what's not.
Yeah.
Right? Everything's
Part of why I'm having this conversation,
yeah.
right? Like,
everything's spiritual. Everything is directional. Everything, there's connection. And even if you don't really believe in God per se, just to believe in a collective consciousness, there's always a subtext or an undercurrent of something that is kind of pushing you along. And
100%. So what were those for you? Or are you saying you didn't really?
I didn't really
come to that yet?
I didn't really think about it at that time.
Okay.
I mean, I know that I can say that I would feel like even at that ages I would act upon that. I mean, like, when I would have time to be in, like, my school would take weekend trips. They'd bring you to Santa Barbara for the day or something. You go wander around, but I spent a lot of time like actually talking to homeless people that lived in Santa Barbara. They'd all congregate in the same area. I'd give them whatever money I had for the weekend, and we'd just sit and I'd listen to what they were
What
going
about?
through, doing what they were about.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing is just, I didn't really, it'd be wrong to say I felt compelled to do that, because at the time I just felt like, I don't know, I mean, helping people that have less than you seems like it's almost like, it's hard for me to say you need like a reason for that. It's how are you not automatically kind of driven to that kind of thing?
And
So
yet many are not.
well, yeah, but I don't know, those people have their own needs in the world too, I guess. But it's just I just didn't really think about it in those terms at all until much, much later in life. And matter of fact, I never really thought about that much about God at all up until when I was 20 years old. And I had this wild, crazy life. I was out partying all the time. The young woman I was spending most of my time with at that time was also partying constantly, and ended up getting pregnant, and so I took kind of this blow of finding this out, and then like a day later, she tells me that well, not only am I pregnant, but I'm going back to this, highly evangelical, fairly fundamentalist, non-denominational church, and I'm starting that today. And all this is done. This partying's over with now, and I'm pregnant, and I'm going to this, and you're either on board, and we're getting married and doing this, or you're out of here, dude. Wow. And so it was like, whoa.
And this is here.
Yeah, this was here. So, yeah, and it took. It probably took a couple days for that to even like sink in that had happened. I was on this very, I knew I was kind of on this very self-destructive path, and if it wasn't going to be self-destructive, at the least it was going to be outwardly destructive. Mm-hmm. But then this whole mess started up where I'm going to have a kid, and then not only that, but we're definitely having the kid. It's right. And it's also that this person's going to decide to go back to being this very evangelical fundamentalist person that I didn't even know was a clue that existed within them. Mm-hmm. And as I was saying just now, like I never really thought specifically a lot about God.
Right.
And honestly, one day I was just kind of driving down the road. Like a couple days after that, I was just driving down the road, and I was in a really low spot. I was thinking about, I was fairly kind of had a lot of suicidal ideation going on right then, and I was really kind of wondering how I was gonna, live through any of this happening to me, and I felt this whole kind of just thing go on, right, where I hate to make it sound too new agey, and I hate to make it sound anything but but what it was, right. But it just really felt like I was receiving a message at that time that was both part example of feeling like I was a breeze blowing down the street blocks away, and like I could see and hear and feel that, and feeling like I was a small animal way back over in this other part of town, and feeling like I was all these things, and kind of getting this message, in my head that somewhere there's that this has all been, is all going to be taken care of, that there is something here that understands what everybody and everything is going through all the time. And not that they're really, I don't really believe that God, I don't really believe like God doesn't give you more than you can handle. I don't believe that at all, right? A lot of people just get their ass kicked by God, or by life, and it has nothing to do with God. Right. But I did kind of get this feeling that I could walk forward. I could move forward and find another path to put my life on, and
this isn't the end of the world,
and it was going to be okay, and in fact it might have even been a positive, like it might even be like the direction I'm supposed to go in now.
Wow, what a cool I don't know that I ever heard you tell that story, but what a cool like in-breaking. There's there's themes that I'm picking up in these conversations with people, and it's like one of them is like, okay, there's a distinction between actively seeking out a relationship with this thing we call God, right, through practices, disciplines, meditations, whatever, mindfulness, right, just being in tune with that thing, right, and then there's the stories of like the in-breaking, like yours, where it's like, look, this just happened to me, and then the other sort of theme is like you start to see that different people experience this thing in, I call them languages, through like different languages. And so like yours there seems almost, which it'll be interesting to hear the rest of your story and see if that matches. I find people usually have like one or like maybe two of these like languages, and so I'll be curious to see, but that seems sort of like the feel, like some people just feel, right? Feel that presence or feel that messaging.
Yeah, that's the way I experienced it at that time. Now, again at the same time, and I mean, Brett, this again. This is after like days. It wasn't more than just like this one moment feeling either, right? I mean, I delivered pizzas back then. I had spent days literally. I mean, not to be too dark in our conversation, but I had spent like days like thinking about just going headlong into a phone pole in my car. Like, this is. I've just ruined everything at this point. I dropped out of college. I was, probably the most, probably the lowest thing my parents really thought I'd ever be doing. I'm delivering pizzas 80 hours a week. And then, this, party girl went and got pregnant and decided to find God in the meantime. I was at the end. I was like, what worst thing is going to occur here?
Right.
But those thoughts really stopped like immediately after that experience, and it was really meaningful to me. And so I tried to dive headlong into, lady and I got married. It didn't last a real long time, but we got married. I tried to relay my story to we had like a small church group that met at our house, of course. And so we I tried to relate that story to them. This is why I don't tell this very often, because like they were just
you got some negative feedback.
Oh yeah, like there's just no way. That's not flip. Here's a page. God reveals himself like this. Right. God reveals himself like this. What was the scripture you got? And,
right.
It's and I tell you, man, I haven't. That's actually, I don't know, we'll get to that probably down the road, but I have a lot that kind of works like that with my journey to, how I feel about God, my understanding of God.
Yeah.
So.
A lot of negative experiences.
That and a lot of like correctional things that end up occurring as well, it seemed to be more redemptive about it. So, I kind of, I still spent a lot of time trying to just study what the New Testament was really about and reading about it. And, my relationship with my then life was just kind of growing sour by the hour. It was just rough. But I was determined. I was determined at that point to try and do better. Like I just didn't feel that there was much that was spiritually or godlike about these people who came to my house once a week and yelled at me in my living room for a couple hours, and then we go on Sunday down to the church, and half the church speaks in tongues, and they got a whole fleet of people doing intercessory prayers underneath the church every day, and it's all stuff like this. Just doesn't seem like this is like theater. This isn't really church. I don't get where everybody's going here. But, I was kind of determined to have better words for it than you bunch of weirdos, So I started doing a lot of reading, and I, especially thought that I would do a lot of my Bible reading. I started in Acts. Kind of read for like Acts. Okay, this has got to be about how to act.
Yeah.
So, hang on. But, so I spent an awful lot of time just kind of reading, but the more I'd read, the less it really seemed to jibe with what anybody was saying. Like, I'm reading here that you just kind of, there's only a couple people that Jesus or anybody that's following him go and start yelling at. Right. None of those are dudes trying to find the truth. Like it's always some people who are. It's the people in your shoes who are always saying they own the truth here and they're doling it out to you.
Right. That probably was not well received. Right.
No, not at all. Yeah. Not at all. So
that's sort of like you're getting your toe in. That's like your first sort of religious experience since childhood. So where do you go from there?
Well, I stopped going to church again when my first wife and I split up.
Okay, so that continued throughohout that relationship. You were trying.
And that's not like a long time, right? It's about, we made it about 18 months, so, but yeah, I tried that entire time.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, the first time, Kelly, my wife, the first time, the earliest memory she has of actually seeing me in any regular basis, because we knew each other way back then too, just through social circles, but was me sitting in the smoking lounge at Pellissippi reading the Bible all the time. You know,
wow.
and like her and her friends would always talk about that. There's that dude in the
What's
smoking
that
lounge
dude?
reading the Bible, and then he goes to genetics class. So it was just one of those things. But no. So after my first wife and I split up, I just kind of gave up on religion. Again. And part of that wasn't really a giving up. It was just, it was a struggle to survive then.
Yeah,
it was me and I ended up having my kid, so it was me and I had my kid Nate full time, and we were just trying to find a place to live and grow, and I was trying to find some way, because again, it was where, and I think I was a little more conscious of this time, but it was just kind of like an acting in a spiritual way, I mean, and I've told you this story before, I was holding Nate as a baby one night and I just started thinking, about him growing up, and kids all talk, and my dad's a doctor, my dad's a lawyer, and, what's my kid going to say? My dad's a pizza guy, It's just like, this can't work, this isn't it. I've got to not just be able to support this kid, but they got to have something that they want to, stand on. It's, our family pride, and again, not to slight people that are doing that kind of job.
Right, no, but that's a beautiful image of just, your love for this child, motivating and inspiring you to be better for him.
It had to make everything change. Yeah. And, and I had a couple of friends that really pulled through for me at that time and kind of helped me out. And I started working in the technology field shortly after that. And, but I still wasn't very church affiliated for probably maybe 3 more years went by. And then...
well, and not even just church affiliation is my interest, but just, was there a spiritual life? Was there anything?
No, there really wasn't. Yeah. There really wasn't. There was just...
Did you ever think back about that moment?
Frequently, because those kinds of things really sustained me in the harder times.
It's like that got you through.
Yeah. That moment when I had that oneness feeling, and also just a couple of other smaller moments, just spending time with my son and realizing how much I just loved this kid, instantly from the time that I saw him, was just, all of this was just it was stuff that really kind of pulled me through.
Yeah, that alone, that whole parenthood thing is, and I always feel bad when I say things like this, because I understand that if you don't have a kid, you don't know what this is like, but that in and of itself to me is just like one of the most spiritual experiences you can have, is when you have this child and you go, oh, I don't know that I've understood what love is until like this moment. And then it trips you out, because it's like you think, then I go like, oh shit, like my parents love me like that, right? Like, I always felt loved by my parents. My parents are awesome, but like it brings it a whole new level where you're like, oh, they really love me.
Yeah. They really are in it, Yeah. And and like I said, I just kind of got by like that for a few years, and it, I was needing more, but I wasn't really in a position to even I didn't really even have the mental capabilities at that time to do much more than survive. But it was, but when that went on for a little bit, but then. Kelly and I started dating, we got married, we decided we needed a church for our kids to go to. And that was really, again, it wasn't any kind of like, I don't draw this dividing line because everything is happening for different reasons, but, we were just kind of driven to go get back into a church life. We wanted our kids to have some social groups of, where we could meet more parents about, who they were, and, try and get people that were a little more aligned the same way that we were. And we ended up joining the Unitarian Church. Yeah. And I've been part of one of the couple of Unitarian churches in Knoxville since '99. And so we stayed out at the West Side out in Farragut for several years, and I was still struggling to find the right kind of growth experiences that I wanted, I wasn't really. I don't know. I guess it's hard because again, it's most of the things that at least I consider to be spiritual things that have happened at some point in time, right? I mean, I think a lot of people wouldn't even consider them to be very spiritual, or they wouldn't, but things that actually just shake me to the,
Yeah.
foundations
Yeah.
of who I am. Like when somebody, and anybody can say it, but somebody will say some words, every once in a while somebody will say something to you,
Yeah,
and it's just like they
hits
hit
you.
you with a bolt of
Yeah,
lightning or
sure.
something. You're like, oh. So like we had this guy at Westside. This old guy's name is Ivan Thor, and he owned a tree farm. He was a forestry professor at UT, owned a tree farm out in Louisville. And and after 9/11, we had this church service after 9/11, and he got up like, we had kind of this open service at Westside where people could talk, and he got up in front of the congregation and just because I mean, like everybody else, I was angry. I wanted to get, what the hell,
Let's go over there
I
and
mean,
get 'em.
let's go get them as soon as we find out who they really are.
Yeah.
But Thor gets up there and he goes, I keep hearing all these talk about terrorists and all these terrible things that they're doing, and terrorists are awful, and how bad they all are. Well, as it turns out, he was part of the Norwegian resistance in World War II. He was one of the teens that was part of Norway had like this teenage resistance to the Nazis when they got occupied.
Wow.
And he was one of those people, and apparently he saw an awful lot of like underground anti-Nazi action.
Yeah.
And like I said, he was just up bawling the whole time, just like, I was the terrorist, and I was the terrorist, and because that's what the Nazis all kept saying. And he wasn't like trying to call American Nazis, but he was just always like,
But like these people we're calling evil, it's a little more complicated.
It's always more complicated. Every terrorist they're fighting for something. They're not usually just fighting against you. They're fighting for something. And it kind of comes down to, I don't know, what I think is kind of some of the core tenets of just being that we talk about. Everybody wants to have community and family and safety, and people all start really fighting real hard about that when they feel it's threatened or missing. And I don't know, so I found that to be, anyway, I found Thor's comments that were like 2 sentences long, but watching this like 6.5 foot tall 280 pound 80-year-old dude cry like a kid up on stage talking about how he was the terrorist fighting off Hitler. And the reality is, no, we're not Nazis, but we're the people in power, and it's people who aren't in power that are fighting us. And it's still the same kind of concept, that everybody's a revolutionary in their own home and a terrorist in somebody else's.
Yeah, but I hear you though, that like, I mean, that is like a form of, relationship with other people, or these moments that you're changed by the words or the conversation. We can call those moments spiritual, certainly. So that what's interesting to me though is that, so like, even so it's like what I'm hearing is you have these really life-changing, in that one instance, glimpses of spirit, of God, of whatever, right? These moments. And now at this point, even this story that you're saying with Thor, like, that happened within the context of church experience, but was really still unrelated to like doctrine or people teaching you spirituality or anything. It's so like your spiritual moments in your life thus far are like external.
All of them really are.
Which is really interesting.
Yeah. So no offense, preacher.
No. This is that.
But there's a lot of, that's just where I feel most of that happens. I mean, sometimes you can definitely get like these spiritual experiences through Scripture, but even then, like Scripture not even being just necessarily Christian Scripture, right? But it's just even that, for me, has mostly clarified things that have happened, or have brought new meaning to things that have happened, or it's not really been that like it's the revelation,
right?
But it more fully unlocks the things that were or were supposed to have been.
So, All right, so you guys are at the Unitarian Church. You've got a few kids at this point. And then what?
Then I started, my oldest kid got old enough to be a high schooler, and I started a high school group. Mm-hmm. And then we moved that group to a bigger church, a bigger Unitarian church that had more kids. And I started getting really involved with the Unitarians, and the kids brought me all kinds of. The kids were just a spiritual joy constantly. They were always just the best.
Say more about that.
Well, kids, teenagers are smart enough to have insight and dumb enough to not to keep it from you when they should. They're just kind of the ultimate in people trying to look for they cause you to really re-examine a lot of the ways that you view things, and it's working with teens is kind of it's a two-way street, and we try to come up with because we did a lot of I had to have lesson plans. I ran this high school youth group, so I'd have Sunday school plans plus youth group plans, and it was always like I'm really big into service projects. I think you can probably tell just from the way that I talk about how I receive spiritual impetus, and input. I'm very much into kind of
community,
hands-on
people,
outreach,
relationships.
Yes. So we did a lot of that kind of stuff. We brought in people from other religions that would come and talk and tell stories and, be able to share. And kids always just have such good insights. The kids at our church did church service twice a year, created the sermon, the music, decided what the offertory was going to be for, the share the plate stuff that everybody does. They did the whole thing, end to end, and they always came up with such great services, about just community. And they were almost always about community. And again, I remember one that we wrote. We had a youth conference at our church one weekend, and that was one of the overriding themes of the youth conference was to create a sermon for that Sunday, which people thought I was crazy for doing because, kids don't sleep the entire weekend when they go to these things. And then we were going to be hosting church on Sunday morning. And so, but it turned out to be one of the coolest services that they did. It was all of this, that's not what it was called. It was kind of this music of your heart sort of thing, where we had these improvisational musicians kind of that were kids, but they'd play and they had hand instruments to hand out and people would play, and it was kind of this building community rhythm stuff. It was really awesome.
What an interesting context of just that the community is open and flexible and free enough to allow that sort of thing to happen. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. That's
it's pretty Unitarian.
I know we're not promoting the Unitarians here, Tim, but that is a pretty Unitarian concept.
Yeah, I would think that's part of the culture. Yeah.
But then the church shooting came along in the summer of 2008, and I think that's really when I started trying to find a more consistent and constant connection between what I believe, what I see, how I want to kind of frame that into something that was a little more solid, because I needed to have, I really needed to have much more solid connection on what was keeping me afloat at that time.
Yeah. Well, and for anybody who ever listens to this who doesn't, because I know your story, but just to be clear, you were there.
Yes.
And so obviously your the mental, emotional, all else effects that had on you were quite paralyzing.
It was definitely a real disaster for years, and it was something that didn't actually. It got worse for about 2 years before, or maybe even 3 before it actually started getting better. Mm-hmm. I really can't. I have a lot of distinguishable events that I can tell you about, during that time, or that I could talk about, but I do not have a consistent order of timeline from really the summer of 2008 until almost 2011.
Yeah.
It's just,
that
was the same day.
Yeah, sure.
That was all one big day.
Well, it makes sense.
So,
yeah.
we did a ton of things like that. The community outpouring was massive that year, but a lot of it was just very, God, honestly, Brett, man, a lot of it was just really meaningless. And I mean,
Of course.
I don't feel bad saying that now because, now it's like 14 years later. So I think it's safe to kind of, not worry about offending people at the time. But, like we got people all over the place would send you stuff, and people mostly send us cranes, like these little, origami cranes, little folded paper cranes.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, there was a big thing about people sending us. We could have swam in cranes in the whole church. Like we could have just filled half the church with cranes,
What
paper
the
cranes.
hell's with that?
1,000 people at 1,000 churches all send you 100 of them that they
What's the
folded.
significance? I don't understand the.
Have you ever heard that?
I mean, is that equivalent to saying I'm thinking and praying for you? Like,
I don't know. I don't know if it's supposed to be some non-religious way. I mean, there is some story that's there is some story about folding 1,000 paper cranes and getting a wish to come true.
Oh, okay.
But mostly, I think it was just. I mean, yeah, and I'm sorry to. I don't want to offend anybody that might be listening to this at some point. But the fact is, a lot of these times, I think it's something that other people do to make themselves feel better.
Well, of course,
about
that's
what's
why I'm
happened to
saying
you,
it's
right?
sort of like saying.
Yes, it's just saying
people need to feel like they're doing something.
I'm wishing well upon
Right,
you, know. But those actions are weird because like one of the. All right, side story, right? One of the guys that actually, was part of making all these from another church. He actually came to our church because we did a bunch of youth conferences that year too.
Mm-hmm.
He came to our church. We had installed locks on the front door, magnetic locks, so that just for events like this, so that we didn't have to hire somebody to watch the door the whole time. Because we all got shut up that year. Nobody was interested in leaving the door wide open all night long.
Jeez.
But this guy came down here, and was just, God, he was talking. He's like, I just remember listening to some music. We were listening to such and such band, and I could smell these, scented candles, and we were, writing some poems and folding cranes for you guys. And it just makes me so sad that, you've all become so afraid and you've locked this all up. And
whoa.
yeah, right?
Yeah.
Like, motherfucker.
Yeah,
I remember smelling gunpowder and blood. So yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow. What a lack of awareness.
Right.
On that.
Right. But it makes me wonder, like, how many people are there, and I guess these days I kind of equate it. I like the guy a lot, like the person. Again, if he ever hears this, I just don't want him to feel bad either, because I don't think he meant it the way it came out, or that I remember it. Right. And I was big chip on my shoulder anyway, so it's possible that I even remember it a little skewed, but But I think it's in a spiritual context, it gets down to kind of a letter of the law kind of people. You're not really empathizing. It's, I guess, in a lot of equivalent, it's like the thing of I'll pray for you, I'll pray for you, I'll pray for you, I'll pray for you.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure.
Whatever.
Really
Whatever that means.
Sure. No, I can understand that completely. Yeah, that's. I mean, what is the. What can anyone really do? Right, is the thing.
Yeah, and the answer is really not much.
Right. What's interesting to me though about something you said though is that you have this extremely traumatic nightmare situation happen, this experience happen, this event, and you tell me if I'm off here. What I'm sort of hearing you say is then after that fog of a few years, it was as if almost in like a self-preservation way, or like if I'm gonna make myself better, which basically I have to do, then I've got to get these aspects of my life, one being spirituality, figured out. It's sort of what I'm hearing you say, because you said I got to line those up. They have to coincide in a better way.
Absolutely. and yeah, my poor wife Kelly suffered so much during this time because of me, really, because I just didn't really have any. The future wasn't something I cared about anymore. What difference does it make? I'd seen people who had such intricate plans for their future that died, and it just seems like people just died all of a sudden at the time, and it was just really, really hard to kind of wrap your head around it, of just what is the meaning of what we're doing. So no, I had to get to where I had a more fixed set of beliefs, which I don't know that I've really gotten an incredibly more fixed set of beliefs even yet. But it's just I felt like I had to have a more foundational set of this is good, this is bad, this is how I express that. If people want to ask about spirituality and me, this is the kinds of things I need to talk about. And, this is because I just needed something to kind of a pole to kind of help keep me on the balance beam for a while, before I could really get my footing back in.
It's funny, what that makes me think of. I don't know that I've ever expressed this in this way or thought about this, but what I hear in that is meaning. Like, so all of a sudden, one way we could talk about this word, spirituality, would be to call it meaning in life.
Yes.
Like, that's what I sort of hear you saying, is that I've got to find, like, what matters in life. Why does any of this matter?
Well, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean,
and so far, all these experiences we've talked about in your life have been things that, right? It was in that first example, it's like, no, there's still meaning to life, right? Even though this is a rough spot and this is going to be hard, it's interesting. I don't know if I'm articulating that well, but
no, I think that's about right. And what the core of that meaning is important. I mean, we've talked about at different times in the Theology on Tap group, about like, I mean, again, it seems to me it's almost like, if you want to get tropey about it, you could be like, how could Hitler have been saved, right? And in the end, it's, or, murderer of some sort, or this guy that came and shot up my church, or, what's the redemption path for them? And if there is redemption, in light of like trying to look for some eternal reward, it really seems like if all those people can be saved, the people who did the worst things that you could possibly imagine, how could it possibly be important for you to sacrifice anything? I mean, you can still end up being in heaven at the end of it. But it's not, because most of the meaning that I find is really about how many people you can be bringing with you along the way. How many... the Rastafarians, right, think that in the end it's not the saved people that get plucked out, right? The saved people don't get plucked out and brought to heaven, and the biblical verses really have a lot to do about tending your garden that really kind of assimilates to heaven. Nobody actually pulls out the good plants out of their garden. You pull the weeds out. So like when the judgment day comes and all, this is the heaven.
They believe that this is heaven already.
Yeah, this is it.
And it might seem like a hell sometimes because we allow it and create it to
because we've done that.
Right.
Yeah, and
I quite like that.
I do too. I don't know if that quite really is. I don't know if I 100% believe that, but I really like that idea that and if it isn't. Well, I don't know how your actions, thoughts, wants, or anything translate into what's after this life, but, do you really want to, like, go ahead and behave in the same way when you get to, eternal paradise, where you still throw your cups out the window, you walk by people that are, broken leg on the side of the road, and you're like, oh, see ya. Yeah. That guy could be a murderer. Right. It's so, a lot of just, I think a lot of the meaning to everything in life is just what you can do to ease others' loneliness and suffering along the way too. I mean,
it's interesting because it goes full circle back to sort of where you started, of like the first glimpses you found of anything we would call spiritual have been in community and in relationship with people.
No, that's true.
Meaningful relationships, right?
No, that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. But
and maybe, I mean, I'll venture a guess it, but right. So, and I still haven't figured out the timeline, but like you showed up in my life, and then therefore pretty quickly became a part of this Theology on Tap group we do. And maybe that's why that clicked with you so well, because it was a place where people were coming to be authentic and genuine and meaningful relationships.
So what had happened there, right, is Dustin got out of the military. This is before the shooting happened. Mm-hmm. Dustin got out of the military. We were hanging out with
our mutual good friend who you grew up around. Right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, I've known ever since I've lived here, at least. Right. Yeah, and he was it might have been just like right after he got back, but I hadn't seen him in a long time. He went and joined the military around 2000, and whenever
he was probably in a real bad rough spot when you found him.
Yeah, he had worked out at the lab for a while, but then he lost his job there. He was having a tough time, so he went to do some work with my parents, do some landscaping work with my parents, and looked like he needed a little bit more than that. So I asked my parents to bring him to Ascension and see if they could get him to start going to Ascension, and he did. And while that was going on, this shooting happened, and I was flailing about for a while. And about the end of the time that I was actually, right before I'd kind of started pulling my life back together, Dustin was talking to me. It was like, hey, Brett the pastor is getting together this group, to come and hang out, and we're just going to drink beer and talk about Bible stuff and spirituality. I'm like, I don't know a ton of Bible stuff, but I know a fair amount of, how I feel about spirituality, and I could use some direction there. So sure, I'll go if they let you there. It should be
okay. Well played.
Yeah. If you're allowed to be there, it can't be that bad.
Oh, that is true.
But and it's just all kind of, and that's how we actually started hanging out, and got to know all the old gang of guys, and it's just kind of continued on.
I mean, that had to be 2010.
It was about 2010,
something like that.
Yeah. Well, okay, so actually it was kind of in the mid throes of my having all kinds of like the worst problems, because think about right before 2012 started is when I actually, because I had moved out of my house and everything. I mean, I was not doing well. But 2012 is when I started really kind of pulling all my crap back together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Man. So, anything to talk about just in this period of life that I've known you in? I mean, in and that's a lot of years now. From there to now.
Well, I mean, I can't think of anything that's been like life-shaking that's really happened since then. It's hard to define anything as life-shaking after an event like that, I think. I mean, there's just been all the normal stuff. I mean, it's kids grow up. I think that they're a constant spiritual challenge to everybody. I mean, and our kids, aside from having like fallout from this shooting event as well, but one of my kids went through a lot of addiction problems that took us a long time to get a hold of. Was a real trial for I mean, it was a real trial for him. Let's not be fake about that, but it was a real trial for everybody, at that time, and that was difficult and required an awful lot of finding. Finding forgiveness has been, I think, a theme of the later half of my life. And in a way, I think it's just one of those things that, like...
Finding the ability to forgive or
both.
Accepting forgiveness?
The ability and the mechanisms, and accepting it either, because I've never really been like that. But, I think that's kind of the way that God's addressed a lot of things in my life, is like, you got real hard opinions about something, I have a hard opinion about that one, buddy. It's like, damn it.
Yeah.
yeah, I've got to find a way to make this work. So
Yeah, that's interesting. So sort of that, I mean, that's a continuation too, sort of more of an experience of in-breaking, as I said in the beginning, rather than like constant sort of awareness of presence or.
No, it's just, I mean, I hate to say it, but I mean, I don't really hate to say it. I think it's okay to be that way.
Yeah.
I mostly feel a presence of God when I am the most violating the things that I think would make that person happy. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's, I think that usually when I'm on track, I feel good anyway,
Yeah.
I mean, it's,
Well, that's
so,
a very common
yeah,
thing, right? I mean, yeah, how common is it for people to say that the moments they've felt closest to this thing we call God are in tragedy and trial and chaos and moments of, when you're brought to your knees.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, it's not not even in desperation so much, but like just out of being angry or being, it's just.
I think I don't know if he was quoting someone else or if this is his thing, but I remember Richard Rohr saying that that we typically experience God, or like mystical experiences happen in either the great suffering or the immense love of the world. Moments of great suffering or moments of immense love.
Yeah, the immense love are so easy to feel. It's so difficult to actually be in touch with that in the moments of suffering. Though that's where I feel like any kind of structure needs to come into play. It's so hard to feel that when you want to be angry. I mean, I've had a lot of anger over my life that I've really just had and it's been a lot more present than I've ever really wanted to admit to it. But yeah, I've had to deal with a lot of that over the last many years.
That's very interesting. We don't need to go down this rabbit hole here, but it's perhaps a conversation for another time. Like I'm pretty sure anyone who knows you would never describe you as like angry. And yet, so that's interesting that you have that, and it coincides with me. And it's part of my recent journey with this whole Enneagram stuff. That like apparently that's the number I identify with, which is a 9. This is like part of their story is a hidden anger, like you're just basically always angry internally, but you don't ever. People would never say that you're angry, and it took me a while to even. I was like, wait, I'm not angry, and it took me a while to really see, like, oh yeah, dude, I walk around with some things.
I'm totally angry
that I'm mad about a lot.
Yeah, I'm totally angry all the time. And whether that was because I don't know about you, but whether it's because you were the 4 foot tall, 50-pound kid for as a little kid, and you got picked on a lot, or whether it's something else, it's just I'm not now, but yeah, I've had many years where I've just always been angry.
Interesting.
We spent, me and another guy that helped teach Sunday school with me, we spent a couple of months building a program after the shooting happened around forgiveness, which was we did 6 lessons on forgiveness that all ended up being like an hour and a half long. And it caused a lot of grief internally at the church that we did this, because a lot of people got the wrong idea, like we were trying to force all these kids to go and say it's okay you came and shot this all up and all that, which wasn't it at all. It was really an in-depth look. Each week we took a look at a different form of forgiveness, including why it's okay to not ever forgive people, or what forgiveness really means, or
well, there's a lot of people don't understand that, but I mean, it's a self thing too. I mean, to not forgive is basically just poisoning yourself.
And that was the entire approach we were really trying to get at. Is look, you kids don't need to feel you're going to be. And luckily, something else ended up happening with the court. But it was just this is like a lot of court situations. You're going to hear about this every day, maybe for the next decade. As appeals go by and this goes by and that. We don't want you to be. these kids, people, everybody, they felt a lot of guilt. They felt a lot of guilt about not suffering more. They felt a lot of guilt about, who made it and didn't make it.
Right.
They felt guilty about being relieved
Trying
that
to move
they
on.
made it.
Right,
Just
sure, of
trying
course.
yes, it was just, and oh man, I spent endless hours for months and months and months and months and months trying to individually or in small groups cope with all this stuff going on. But so this was our answer though, was like, hey, we're going to put together this whole set of lessons about, and for context for people listening, I taught Sunday school for high schoolers for probably 6-7 years. Most of the time you're dealing with maybe, if you're lucky, 14 kids will show up.
Sure.
High school kids
Right.
will show up to come to Sunday school. I mean, anybody with a teenager knows exactly what's going on.
Right.
But usually it's more like 6 to 8,
Right.
But after that happened, I was seeing like 60 kids a weekend
Wow.
coming in, because it was everybody, they'd bring their friends. We had people that'd come back from college if they were close enough to come in for a while. And it was just like,
Wow.
it was just so overwhelming.
Intense.
But yeah, so we did this whole thing around just like why you have to be able to unburden yourself, because you guys are all young and you can't be carrying this around forever, that you felt guilty.
Yeah, the ripple effect, the reverberation on that would
Yeah.
be, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, you just can't sit here and feel guilty about the fact that you didn't come to church that day.
Yeah. Which maybe that's a whole, I haven't thought about that too, right? Like that's part of the power and the necessity of forgiveness is like if it's not only poisoning yourself, but that anger, that resentment, whatever that is, that's going to reverberate out and echo out and affect other people's lives.
Well, that's
the people around you, your loved ones.
those events are like that to begin with.
Of course, yeah.
because that's always. Yeah, I think I was telling somebody else this recently. It's just you see these events, and like our event, 2 people died, 6 people critically wounded, and you're just like, oh, that's not even very many, Baron. That's not even really a mass shooting. But then you don't really see that like 4 times as many people in the year past died in the next 2 months, from some other cause. But it's huge fluctuation of people that just had like a heart attack or,
right. Well, just even your story. I mean, just like the effects, even in the microcosm of your world, having like a 3-year period that is essentially deleted from memory. I mean, it's just
complete wash.
Right.
Yeah.
And then how that affected wife, children, work relationships, friendships, right? And how they affect, it's,
And it cascades to just, and I'm not even part of the original statistic here, but yeah, there's still like 30, 40 people that end up having some kind of effect from this thing because of what happened to me.
Right.
And, my kids, only one of my kids was actually there, but they had all these effects too. Same, it's just, that's just the way it is, it's a real cascading effect. Well, love needs to be the same way, and that's why you got to practice all the time. I mean, it's just why you got to practice all the time. There's just too much bad shit that goes on.
Practice loving.
Yeah. Which is what God tells you to do too.
Oh, really?
If you didn't know.
Good job. Thanks for pointing that out, buddy.
There's your lesson for the day.
Thanks, bud.
Jesus told you to be loving people.
Well, this feels good, man. I mean, is there anything else in terms of life story you would want to highlight, or do you have like? I'm assuming that first experience you described is perhaps the most quote unquote spiritual experience you've ever had.
Oh, it absolutely. Absolutely. No, check back. I think later this year, after I sort through some other things that are going on, it'll be culminating later this year. Then I think I'll have some more that I can talk about. But that's really the essence of it, man. I mean, it's I still don't have quite the structured kind of spiritual beliefs that I had been looking for years, but I am much more confident on like. I'm pretty sure that most of the time, getting uncomfortable to be kind is a pretty key requirement for all of them. And I wish more people could get themselves into that position, you know,
Uncomfortable
uncomfortable
to be kind.
Look, man, if you got to reach out to people that are really needy, for one, you have to recognize how anything you did might have contributed to that. You have to be able to be around people that are otherwise dangerous, you know, whether that be because they're diseased, drug addict,
Right.
you know,
I got it.
people
Yeah.
just,
So not just being kind to your family and your neighbor and it's a more like intentional, active kindness.
yeah, I mean, it includes those things too.
Of course.
Yes, but it includes an awful lot of being kind and recognizing what kind of things people really, you know, again, I don't want to be all focused on homeless people either, but you know, like most of the people you meet that are suffering, that are homeless, they're lacking human connection as much as anything else.
They have no social net. Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably as a result of some horrible, tragic thing that rippled out and
Yes,
affected their lives.
that's exactly right.
Right.
Yeah. So, you know, listening to what their stories are, I've never come away worse aware for finding out what people's deal is, you know? I mean, it's all part of growth.
Yeah. All right.
You got any more you want to ask about?
Well, I'm just sitting here thinking it's off topic, but I'm wondering when somebody's going to tell me it. Like, we can't get into this now, but like, I think people, when I say like I'm looking about spiritual stories or moments, like those all have to be positive. But I think people have also experienced some spiritual dark things too. I have in my own life. But so I'm waiting for that story to come out sometime. Or I wonder, like, you know, like ghosts, like, I don't know, like that kind of stuff. Like those are spiritual, you know what I mean? There's,
That's fair.
you know,
that's fair.
You know,
Yeah.
you ever had any weird
don't have any good
paranormal
ghost
stuff?
I don't have any weird ghost stories.
Your parents have some good alien stuff though, right?
They do.
I gotta talk to them about that. Yeah.
My dad's got plenty of weird stories if you ever can get them to talk about them that are very, very real.
Maybe I'll get Alan on here. He's got a radio voice, yeah.
Yeah, he's got a face for radio too.
Yeah.
Yeah, just kidding.
Oh, man. Yeah, right.
I didn't mean that. I especially shouldn't mean that since I looked at his phone the other day and it unlocked. So, you know,
That's hilarious. That's funny. All right, man. Well, if you got it, last chance.
I think that's all I've got right now.
All right, brother. Well, maybe we'll do it again sometime. I appreciate you taking the time and telling your story and being vulnerable and sharing. It's an honor to get to be here with you for it and listen. And
thanks for thinking of me.
Man. Love you, buddy. And we'll
You too, Brett. Yes.
We'll do it again sometime.
For sure.
Thanks, brother.